survey the various fields of European endeavour in 1500, and England barely registered. Its cultural pulse was very faint indeed. The great names of the day in art, Sandro Botticelli and Albrecht Dürer, for example, church power, Giovanni di Lorenzo de' Medici, later Pope Leo X, finance and banking, Jakob Fugger, navigation and exploration, Christopher Columbus, political analysis, Niccolo Machiavelli, science and human knowledge, Leonardo da Vinci, and university scholarship, Erasmus of Rotterdam, all had, as well as their brilliance, at least one other thing in common. They were not English. The most powerful royal courts and most impressive seats of learning were to be found in Italy, Spain, France, and Germany. The Tudor Henry VII, King of England in 1500, was able to punch above his weight diplomatically by signing international peace treaties and marrying off his children to fellow princes. But Henry's wider influence was nothing compared with the kings of France and Spain, and, preeminently, the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, who ruled the great agglomeration of territories that make up modern Germany and Central Europe. To be understood abroad, an Englishman had to speak either another European vernacular or, ideally, Latin. English was the language whose furthest reach was Calais, at least when Calais was still an English possession, but it was lost by battle to the French in 1558. In terms of trade and navigation, England was a very long way behind other European powers. As we will see, the great entrepot of northwestern Europe, where the riches of the Middle East and Asia were bought by English merchants, was Antwerp. Before that it had been Bruges. The Italian cities of Genoa and Venice were formidable commercial powers in the eastern Mediterranean, and Naples was much larger even than Paris in terms of its population, and Paris in turn was considerably bigger than London. Banking houses of Augsburg, like the Fugger and the Wessler, dominated the financial scene of Western Europe, lending huge sums of money to kings and emperors, including, a little later, kings of England. London was a modest satellite of a European system of international trade whose weight was settled firmly in the middle of the continent. When it came to the wider world, by 1500 Spain and Portugal had well-established global ambitions. Blessed by the papacy, those two Iberian powers had practically carved up the whole world between them, as in 1493 Pope Alexander VI divided the globe by a meridian drawn north to south 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands. Spain's Western imperial ambitions were just at that point beginning to develop. Already, by 1500, Portuguese explorers knew Africa and the Middle East, and were establishing bases in the East Indies to import pepper and valuable spices into Europe. Within a few decades, the vast riches of Mexico would be opened up to plunder and exploitation. The silver fleets, returning across the Atlantic by way of the Caribbean, became the greatest prop of global Spanish power. In 1503, the Casa de la Contratación, a department of Spain's central government, was set up to process the immensely valuable cargoes returning from the other side of the world. It was also a highly regarded school of navigation that developed ever more advanced techniques of further exploration. In this new world, English merchants and navigators were nowhere to be seen. To say empire or colony to such a merchant in 1500 would be to invite a puzzled look at words which had no obvious relevance to his life and business. Equally, English navigators would take another half-century even to begin to catch up with the advanced skills of Portuguese and Spanish sea captains. If the rise of London looks all the more remarkable in the light of the utter marginality of England at the beginning of the 16th century, then just as confounding is the fact that the city flourished as, in the decades that followed, continental Europe was torn by religious war, massacre, and revolt. Europe at the best of times was a hodgepodge of kingdoms, provinces, dukedoms, and city-states. Even relatively settled kingdoms like France and England had all kinds of semi-autonomous regions and princedoms. Notionally, Europe was bound together by the idea and structures of Christendom, in which the formidable multinational spiritual corporation that was the Catholic Church, with its Pope in Rome, offered to all Christian Europeans the keys to heaven, and gave a sense of unity to an otherwise disparate and diverse continent. In 1500, the enemies of Christendom were firmly on the outside. The Ottoman Empire